Alright, so this is sort of a part 2 to a previous video I made titled Battle of the Bastard Ideals. Now that I think about it, I don't actually know how much the Genshin Impact fandom and the Game of Thrones fandom overlaps. Probably not that much. I like the title at least. Anyways, here we are, with a more comprehensive analysis of each of the 7 Archons in Genshin Impact and what propaganda about their ideals Celestia has been feeding them. I will be discussing what the bastardized ideal of each of the Archons manifests as, how the Archons are grappling with that definition, and how the Archons might change their views about their ideals in the future. Hopefully to a more productive and healthy place. Without any further ado, let the brainwashing begin. Starting off, we have our favorite tone-deaf bard, Venti. Or, if we want to get fancy and call him by his demon name, Barbatos. He rules over Mondstadt, and his ideal is freedom. However, during the Archon quest, and even in places such as the Genshin Impact manga, his concept of freedom manifests as neglect. He is utterly aloof and clueless about the situation of Mondstadt at the beginning of the Archon quest, and that is even mirrored in the manga, where he was confused at the tyrannical rule of the Lawrence clan. That's 2 for 2, bud. You wake up from a century-long nap and don't even recognize the nation you are supposed to rule over. Of all the Archons, it seems like Barbatos is the most rigid in his concept of freedom, and that's surprising, because he's out here contending with the likes of A. Even though he questions what freedom means if demanded by a god in the Mondstadt Archon quest, there does not seem to be any shift in how he approaches freedom in relation to his Archonhood. I would like to think that's because Venti does not have a second story quest yet. Perhaps in his second story quest, whenever that might happen, if ever, he will have to grapple with the concept of freedom a bit more, perhaps having to claim some responsibility over Mondstadt's safety. Currently, in the story quest we have for him so far, he doesn't really shift his attitudes or undergo any character development. I'm just hoping we'll get some Venti development when we get Dornman Port. Final tidbit about Venti, I promise, but think for a second of how the Fatui has obtained all of the Gnosis. The Geo, Electro, Dendro, and Hydro Gnosis were all taken via diplomatic agreement. Only the Animo Gnosis was forcibly taken. I mean, there are theories that Venti willingly gave up his Gnosis, but come on. Only the Animo Gnosis was taken forcibly, or at least that's what it seemed like. I believe that this is an indicator that Barbatos is still clinging on to Celestia's bastardized concept of freedom, that being neglect, as the Gnosis are symbols of Celestia's power over the Archons. Just some food for thought. I really hope our favorite tone-deaf bard assumes some semblance of responsibility in the future, embodying true freedom as a ruler instead of failing to be a ruler in the first place, neglecting Mondstadt and its citizens. Okay, on to Morax, and oh boy, does this one have a body count higher than the Empire State Building. His ideal of contracts manifests as blind obedience, and to an unhealthy degree. First of all, he made a contract with Celestia to keep quiet about what happened during the Cataclysm of Conria, as well as a contract with the Tsaritsa to fake his own death and hand over the Gnosis in return for something. Contracts. The first of which is, well, very shady, as the Cataclysm was obviously a horrible event, and seeing that Zhongli is obliged to keep the events of the Cataclysm under wraps, it's clear to me that both himself and Celestia did some awful things over in Goth Minecraft land. The second contract, the contract to end all contracts, sees Morax step down from his position as an Archon, hand over his Gnosis to the Tsaritsa, fake his own death, and it could have seriously endangered Liyue Harbor. Almost akin to Venti's neglect over Mondstadt, Morax abandons Liyue to fight Osail by themselves. While he still embodies the ideal of contracts and still has his divine seat, by giving away his Gnosis and choosing to live as a mortal in Liyue Harbor, Zhongli is starting to distance himself from the bastardized ideal of contracts that Celestia granted him, namely, blind obedience. As stated before in my previous video, Morax reflects on people and gods abandoning the things they love to pursue the right path. Perhaps he will abandon his ideal of contracts in the future to help the traveler with the war against Celestia, as defying Celestia is the ultimate contract breaker. Beelzebul's ideal is eternity, and hoo boy, this one kind of broke all precedents for Genshin Impact, because when the Inazuma Archon quest released, it became our first instance in the story where the Archon was an antagonistic force. Her ideal of eternity manifested itself as stagnation. Her wish for Inazuma to be put into an unchanging stasis led the island nation down a path of chaos. The economy of Inazuma plummeted during the Sakoku decree. Inazuman citizens were trapped within their borders, unable to leave, while Fatui agents were free to meddle with Inazuman affairs while a civil war erupted. Now, here's the thing about eternity. It can't truly be grasped. True eternity is virtually impossible. Erosion wears down everything and everyone, and the only constant in this world is change. Yet eternity is the ideal closest to the heavenly principles, and it represents unrelenting order and authority without any flaws or weaknesses. Beelzebul's pursuit of this eternity was desperate and reckless. She locked herself in the plane of Euthymia in an attempt to ward off erosion. She banished visions within Inazuma because she believed the ambitions of vision wielders to be incompatible with her idea of eternity. However, by the end of the Inazuma Archon quest, she realizes that she should reconsider what eternity truly means. Now, Beelzebul's recontextualization of eternity is bigger than people give it credit for, or at least I think so. Her reconsideration of her ideal poses a serious threat to the heavenly principles, as the manifestation of the ideal closest to them is now questioning her position. Beelzebul has started to embrace eternity as something different from the stasis she put Inazuma through, rather being accepting of change and learning how to best deal with it while persevering through hardship. Buer is an interesting case, because I don't believe her to represent a stained ideal of Celestia. Rather, I think the bastardization of wisdom would more accurately apply to someone like Deshret. Perhaps that's a future video. But back to Buer and the Sumeru Archon quest. I believe that wisdom manifested as folly within the academia. It was not Buer herself that exemplified folly, but rather the sages. They were the ones who imprisoned Buer and abused the Akasha system. This indicates that wisdom will almost always lead to ambition, and ambition will inevitably give way to folly. Therefore, the only way to create a being free from folly is to create not a stupid being, not a naive being, but a wise being with still much to learn. Enter Buer. Buer, in this sense, can be seen as a danger to Celestia, as though she represents the good facets of wisdom, she does not give way to its errors like Deshret did. Or at least she hasn't yet. She's wise beyond her years, yet not prone to desperately grasp for power, as one corrupted with knowledge, or forbidden knowledge, is wont to do. Focalors, our favorite drama queen whose ideal of justice manifests as straight-up fraud. The justice system in Fontaine is literally treated as a show, and despite Nouvelette's best efforts at keeping things civil, Lady Farina constantly treats trials as a source of amusement and not as an opportunity for, the law to be impartial. This zoomed-in look on Fontaine reveals the bigger picture, that Celestia's system of justice is farcical and fraudulent, as they were the ones who placed Focalors in a condition where justice could even be manifested as fraud in the first place. The theme of fraud evolves to deception, as it is revealed that Focalors was harnessing Numa Usia energy to destroy her divine throne as an act to outright thwart the will of Celestia. Thus, Focalors has abandoned the ideal of fraudulent justice because by ending her life, she not only kills the current incarnation of the Hydro Archon, but ensures that no Hydro Archon can ever exist. No fraudulent justice in this house. Celestia cannot appoint another Archon to exemplify its corrupted views on justice now or ever. Thus has the Hydro Archon successfully taken a big dump on Celestia's broken ideal of justice and returned it to who we believe is the rightful owner of that authority, the Sovereign of Waters, Neuvillette. And yeah, looking at things from the surface level, it does seem like Neuvillette's concept of justice is less corrupt than Farina's. Way to go, Queen. You did the noble thing. Okay, so there's not a lot I can say about the Pyro Archon, in all honesty. Perhaps she's Murata. Perhaps they are someone else. We're not sure, because it seems like our favorite Dragon Sovereign forgot to tell us about her when info-dumping to us. Okay, I guess. You do you, boo. But we can speculate for just a bit, starting with the concept of war. In all honesty, war seems like a pretty negative trait to embody compared to some of the other ideals, such as freedom, wisdom, love, I guess. Then you just have war. I mean, maybe the Pyro Archon abandons the ideal of war by suing for peace. Kind of like how Zhongli signed the contract to end all contracts, perhaps the Pyro Archon could instigate the war to end all wars. Perhaps, like Beelzebul, the Pyro Archon could redefine what war means to her. This kind of reminds me of how in Greek mythology, both Ares and Athena embodied war. But while Ares represented the brutal and bloody aspect of war, Athena represented the tactical and disciplinary side of war. Perhaps the current Archon is currently a bloodthirsty god, but over the course of the Archon quest will soften up a bit. Okay, so the Tsaritsa. This whole rant about how the gods will abandon or redefine their ideals initially stemmed from all the chicanery I've stiffed up surrounding the Cryo Archon, and there is a lot of chicanery. First of all, can we all agree that the Tsaritsa's ideal is almost 100% going to be love? Yeah? Okay, great. I mean, the Wanderer outright says that love is a sin when talking about the Tsaritsa. The Travail trailer teases that the Tsaritsa has no love left for her people, and Tartaglia describes her as a gentle soul that needs to harden herself. All around the Tsaritsa is this love imagery, or more accurately, the absence of love. It seems that, unlike all of the other Archons in Teyvat, the Tsaritsa has already fully abandoned her ideal of love. Symbolically and literally, this means that she has defied Celestia's orders, should we assume that the ideals of the Archons were granted by Celestia in the first place. I mean, we know that she's spearheading the rebellion against Celestia, so it's no surprise that she has abandoned her ideal. Not only that, there is a lot of love imagery and family imagery in her followers, most notably the Fatui Harbingers. Tartaglia has a strong bond with his family, and we know that Pulcinella also shows his family a lot of respect and grace. Arlecchino runs an orphanage, the House of the Hearth, and its members all feel strongly loyal towards the house. However, there's a dark twist to all of this. Pulcinella is seemingly putting Tartaglia's family in a dangerous situation by using them as leverage if Tartaglia were to betray the Harbingers. Arlecchino's house, while loving, seems to be recruiting and brainwashing children. And then you can just look at Wanderer/Scaramouche and dissect his relationship with love. Yeah. Not to make a Honkai Star Rail reference here, but the Tsaritsa is trailblazing this entire thing of abandoning ideals. She was the one who made it fashionable, and slowly we can see that all the other Archons are starting to question the very ideal assigned to them by Celestia. Well, I guess you're venting. Seriously, when are we getting a second story quest?